A rich businessman lost everything, but the maid he ignored stood by him with love and support. Dear beloved viewers, welcome back to another heart-touching love story that will leave you inspired and emotional. If you've ever loved someone who ignored you, or if you've ever wondered how to win the heart of someone who once overlooked you, then this story is for you. I promise you, if you watch till the end, you will experience love, pain, loss, and redemption, all in one unforgettable journey. And by the end, you will learn a powerful lesson. True love isn't about wealth, status, or beauty. It's about loyalty, patience, and the courage to love someone even when they don't see your worth. So stay with me till the very last second. I promise this story will touch your heart. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an emotional love story from Alcott Stories. The world saw Liam Carter as a perfect man. Young, successful, and incredibly handsome. At just 30, he had built an empire that others could only dream of. His name echoed in the halls of power, his face graced the covers of business magazines, and his presence commanded both fear and respect. He had everything: wealth, status, and influence. But what he lacked was warmth. His days were filled with back-to-back meetings, luxury parties, and high-profile gatherings. He had the finest things life could offer: a breathtaking mansion overlooking the city, sleek sports cars that roared through the streets, and designer suits that exuded power. He lived in a world where emotions were weaknesses and people were tools. He never looked back at those who served him. They were merely shadows in his world of grandeur. Among those shadows was Sophia Bennett, his loyal maid, a young brown-skinned woman whose presence he never acknowledged. She had worked for him for 3 years, watching him from a distance, caring for a man who didn't even know her name. But despite his arrogance, she had fallen for him, deeply and silently. Sophia was different. Unlike the women who surrounded Liam, drawn to his wealth and power, her love was real. She didn't love him for his status or the luxuries he possessed. She loved him for the rare moments when he wasn't wearing the mask of a ruthless businessman, the fleeting seconds when exhaustion softened his features, the quiet evenings when he stared at the city skyline with loneliness hidden in his cold eyes. She loved the man beneath the arrogance, even when he never saw her. But Liam, he was blind to her existence. Every morning, Sophia would wake before sunrise, ensuring his world remained flawless. She prepared his favorite coffee, black with no sugar, placing it exactly where he liked, only to watch him take it without a glance, without a "thank you." She set out his freshly ironed suits, polished his expensive shoes, and arranged his office without a single crease in sight. She didn't expect gratitude. She only wished he would see her. But Liam Carter didn't see people like her. To him, she was just another worker, another nameless face in the background of his perfect life. If he ever noticed her, it was only to point out a mistake, never to acknowledge the silent devotion in her eyes. His voice was always cold when he spoke to her. "Sophia, my office needs to be spotless. I have an important meeting. You missed a spot on the glass table. Make sure my dinner is ready by the time I get home. I don't like delays." His words weren't cruel, but they lacked warmth. It was as if she wasn't a person, just a part of the house like the furniture. But no matter how cold he was, Sophia couldn't stop loving him. Every time she saw him walking through the house in his expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, his confidence unshakable, her heart ached with the love she could never express. She dreamed of a day when he would look at her, not as an employee, but as a woman. A day when he would notice how her hands trembled slightly whenever she set his coffee on the table. A day when he would hear the unspoken words in her silence. But that day never came. Instead, she watched as beautiful, glamorous women walked in and out of his life. Women who dripped in designer clothes, their laughter echoing through the halls. They clung to him at parties, whispered sweet nothings in his ear, and smiled at him with practiced charm. And yet, none of them stayed. Sophia saw the pattern. They loved his wealth, not him. They admired the businessman, but none of them cared for the man beneath the expensive suit. And Liam, he never cared. He never asked why none of them lasted. His heart was untouchable. One evening, as she walked past his study, she overheard 2 guests laughing softly. "Liam Carter? That man has everything, but a heart? No, darling. He's as cold as his marble floors. The words stung, but not because they were untrue, because she knew it too. Yet Sophia still believed in him. She believed that beneath the arrogance, beneath the cold exterior, there was a man who could love, if only someone truly cared enough to reach him. And she waited. She waited for the day when Liam Carter would realize that the greatest love in his life had always been standing in the shadows, loving him when he had nothing to give in return. But Liam was too blinded by his own world to see the love waiting for him. Little did he know, fate had its own plans. Everything he had, the wealth, the power, the status, was about to be stripped away. And when his world came crashing down, when he had nothing left, the woman he ignored would be the only one standing beside him. Sophia had spent 3 years working in Liam Carter's mansion, moving like a quiet shadow through the grand halls of his estate. She was the one who kept his world in order, the one who ensured his life ran smoothly, even when he didn't acknowledge her presence. She knew every small detail about him, his morning routine, his favorite black coffee, the meals that comforted him after long, exhausting days. She even knew how he preferred his suits arranged in his massive walk-in closet, dark colors at the front, light ones toward the back. But Liam, he never noticed. To him, Sophia was just another employee, another pair of hands doing what was expected. He never once looked at her as a person, let alone a woman. Yet Sophia loved him. It wasn't the kind of love that came suddenly, like a storm crashing against the shore. No, hers was slow, deep, and unwavering, a love that had grown in silence, nurtured by every stolen glance, every moment she watched him when he wasn't looking. She saw him more clearly than anyone else did. While the world admired Liam for his wealth and success, Sophia saw the weight he carried beneath it all. The way his shoulders tensed when he was stressed, the rare moments he sat alone on the balcony at night, staring at the city skyline with an expression that hinted at loneliness. He wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a man who had built walls so high that even he was trapped inside them. But no one cared enough to notice. The women who surrounded him, beautiful, sophisticated, and draped in luxury, only desired what he could give them. They whispered sweet words into his ear, smiled seductively, and clung to his arm at events. But none of them stayed when there was nothing left to take. Sophia saw their games. She watched as they came and went, their affection vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She hated seeing him surrounded by fake love, but she could do nothing about it. She was just the maid, and yet her heart refused to stop loving him. Every morning, she woke before the sun rose, preparing everything to his exact preference. Not because it was her job, but because it was her way of caring for him. She placed his coffee on the table precisely the way he liked it, hoping, just once, that he would look up and say, "Thank you." But he never did. Instead, he would take it without a second glance, his mind already lost in business deals and financial reports. His focus was always on growing his empire, never on the small moments that made life meaningful. Sophia wished he could see beyond his wealth. She wished he would notice the way she hesitated before leaving the room, as if silently waiting for him to acknowledge her. She wished he would hear the unspoken words in her silence, the quiet confession of a woman who loved him with all her heart. But Liam was blind to love. One afternoon, Sophia stood in the kitchen, preparing his lunch when she overheard a conversation between two of the other maids. "He'll never change, you know," one of them whispered. "Liam Carter only cares about money." "I don't think he even knows what love is," the other laughed. "Women are nothing more than entertainment for him." Their words cut deep, not because Sophia didn't know the truth, but because she didn't want to believe it. Could a man like Liam ever love someone like her? Could he ever look past her uniform, past her status, and see the heart that had been devoted to him for years? She didn't have the answer, but she wasn't ready to give up. One evening, she found herself standing outside Liam's study, peeking through the slightly open door. He was seated at his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. There was something different about him in that moment, a quiet vulnerability hidden beneath his usual arrogance. And that was when it hit her. Liam Carter wasn't as heartless as he seemed. He was just lost. For the first time, Sophia realized that maybe, just maybe, his coldness wasn't because he didn't feel. Maybe it was because he was afraid to. Her love for him deepened that night. Because she didn't just love the powerful businessman the world admired, she loved the lonely man no one else cared to understand. And so she decided to keep waiting. Waiting for the day he would look at her, truly see her, and understand that the greatest love of his life had been right beside him all along. But what Sophia didn't know was that fate was about to change everything. Liam's world, the empire he had built so ruthlessly, was about to crumble. And when it did, she would be the only one left standing beside him. The fall of Liam Carter was not gradual. It was sudden, brutal, and merciless, like a kingdom set ablaze overnight. For years, he had stood at the top, a ruthless businessman, feared and admired by many. His empire was unshakable, his wealth immeasurable. Until it wasn't. The first crack appeared in the form of a bad investment. A deal he had been assured would yield massive returns turned out to be a disaster. Millions vanished in an instant. Liam had dismissed it at first, thinking, "I've lost money before. I'll recover." But then came the second blow, betrayal. A man he had trusted, his closest business partner, the one he had built his empire with, stabbed him in the back. He stole from the company, drained funds, falsified reports, and disappeared, leaving Liam to take the fall. And then, the final strike, a scandal that shook the entire corporate world. Liam's company was accused of fraud, not because of him, but because of the people he had trusted. And in the business world, trust was everything. Overnight, his investors pulled out. His shares plummeted. His board of directors resigned. The empire he had spent his entire life building collapsed before his eyes. The headlines were merciless. Billionaire Liam Carter, from success to scandal. Carter Enterprises defaults, a shocking downfall. Once a king, now a beggar. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now a joke. His bank accounts were frozen. His mansion was seized. His fleet of luxury cars, his private jet, his assets, gone. But what hurt more than losing his wealth was losing the people. The ones who had surrounded him like loyal subjects, the friends who had once raised their glasses to toast his success, all disappeared. He made desperate calls. "David, I need your help." "Sorry, Liam, I can't get involved." "Marcus, I just need a loan to fix this mess." "I'm not running a charity." Even his own relatives turned their backs on him. "Uncle Richard, please." "You made your choices, Liam. Now face the consequences." Liam had never felt fear before. Not when he made ruthless business deals, not when he crushed competitors, not when he risked billions on investments. But now, he was drowning in it. His pride shattered, his confidence destroyed. He had no choice but to leave his mansion behind. He packed a small bag, not of luxury suits and Rolex watches, but of basic clothes and whatever money he had left. With nowhere else to go, he rented a tiny, run-down apartment in a part of the city he had never dared step foot in before. The first night was the hardest. He sat in that cold, empty room, staring at the peeling walls, the broken ceiling fan, the stained carpet. Just weeks ago, he had been in a mansion with golden chandeliers and silk curtains. Now, he had nothing. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts, searching for someone, anyone who would care. But he knew the truth. No one did. A deep emptiness filled his chest, a pain worse than losing money, because money could be earned again. But trust, love, loyalty, once lost, they never return. Liam shut his eyes, leaning back against the wall, feeling the weight of loneliness suffocate him. He had spent his whole life chasing power, and in the end, power had abandoned him. Days passed, then weeks. Liam stopped caring. He stopped shaving, stopped eating properly, stopped looking at himself in the mirror. What was the point? He was no longer Liam Carter, the billionaire. He was just a man with nothing. His body grew weak, his mind clouded with exhaustion. Depression became his only companion. Until one evening, a knock at his door shattered the silence. He hesitated. Who would visit him now? Reluctantly, he stood up, his steps unsteady as he approached the door. He opened it and froze. There, standing before him, was Sophia, his maid, the woman he had ignored, the woman who had loved him in silence, the only one who had stayed. Loyalty is tested in the darkest moments. And for Sophia Bennett, the test had come. Liam Carter, the man she had loved in silence, the man who had once ruled over a world of wealth and power, had lost everything. His business, his money, his so-called friends. And yet, he had never lost her. Even when he barely noticed her, even when he looked past her like she was invisible, her heart had remained his. And now, when the world had abandoned him, she refused to do the same. When Sophia first heard the news of Liam's collapse, she couldn't believe it. She had been dismissed from her job like all the other staff when his mansion was seized, but she had never stopped caring. While others gossiped and laughed at his downfall, she felt only pain. He had been arrogant, cold, unkind. But beneath all of that, she had seen his loneliness. And that loneliness would destroy him if no one stood by his side. She had to find him. After searching for days, she finally got an address. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even a decent apartment. It was a small, forgotten room in a part of the city that Liam had never set foot in before. And when she knocked on his door, her heart ached at the thought of what she might find. The door opened slowly, and there he stood. But he wasn't Liam Carter anymore. Not the powerful billionaire. Not the arrogant businessman. The man before her was weak, disheveled, pale. His once perfectly styled hair was messy, falling over his forehead. His strong posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. His designer suits had been replaced by an old wrinkled shirt and sweatpants. He wasn't just physically unrecognizable. He was mentally shattered. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat. "I heard what happened." Liam let out a bitter laugh. "So you came to see how far I've fallen?" "No." She met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I came because I care." Liam scoffed, stepping back. "I don't need anyone's pity." But Sophia wasn't leaving. She walked past him, stepping into the tiny apartment. It was bare. A small couch, a dusty table, a barely functioning kitchen. The sight of it made her heart twist in pain. She turned to him. "Have you eaten?" Liam didn't answer. She sighed and set down the bag she had brought. Groceries, fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread, medicine. Liam stared at them. "I didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to." He shook his head, running a hand over his face. "Why? Why are you here?" Sophia's voice softened. "Because you have no one else." And for the first time in his life, Liam had no words. That night, Sophia stayed. Liam was too weak to argue, too tired to push her away. She cooked him a warm meal, something simple but nourishing. When she placed the plate in front of him, he hesitated. He had never been taken care of like this before. Sophia watched him eat, her heart aching at how thin and exhausted he looked. She remembered the confident, untouchable businessman he once was. And now he was just a man in need of love. The next morning, Liam woke up to the smell of coffee. He sat up slowly, blinking. Sophia was in the kitchen, moving like she belonged there. For years, she had been just his maid. Now she was the only person standing beside him. He cleared his throat. "You really don't have to do all this." She turned, offering him a small smile. "I want to." His jaw clenched. "I don't deserve it." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Unshaken loyalty. "You don't have to deserve love to receive it." Liam looked away, his throat tightening. No one had ever loved him without a reason before. But Sophia did, and he didn't know what to do with that. Sophia didn't just care for him, she became his strength. She made sure he ate, took his medicine. She cleaned his apartment, made it feel like a home. At night, when she saw him staring blankly at the ceiling, drowning in his own thoughts, she sat beside him in silence. She didn't push. She didn't demand anything from him. She just stayed. And that was enough. Because for the first time in his life, Liam Carter was not alone. Days turned into weeks. Liam slowly began to heal. He was still lost, still broken. But every time he looked at Sophia, every time he saw her unwavering care, her quiet love, something in him shifted. For years he had ignored her. For years he had been blind. But now, he couldn't look away, couldn't ignore the love in her eyes, and he didn't want to. And love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the quiet moments, a soft gaze, a gentle touch, an unwavering presence. Sophia Bennett understood that. She had never expected anything from Liam Carter. She had only ever wanted to love him, even when he had ignored her, even when he had been too blind to see her heart. But now he was beginning to see. Liam wasn't used to accepting help. For years, his wealth had given him a sense of invincibility. He had built an empire with his own hands. He had controlled everything, his business, his life, the people around him. And then, in the blink of an eye, he had lost it all. The fall had shattered him. But what shattered him more was the realization that he had no one. No friends, no family. No one except her, the maid he had once ignored. The woman who had never once ignored him. Sophia didn't treat Liam like a fallen king. She didn't pity him. She simply cared. She made him eat, even when he refused. She forced him to take his medicine, even when he turned away. She talked to him, even when he didn't respond. And when the silence between them grew heavy, when Liam's demons threatened to pull him under, she stayed. She didn't push. She didn't beg for his attention. She simply loved him in the quietest way. And somehow that was louder than anything he had ever known. At first, Liam resented her kindness, not because he didn't want it, but because he didn't understand it. Why? Why was she still here? What did she want? What was she hoping to gain from him now that he had nothing to give? But Sophia never answered his unspoken questions, because her love had never been about what she could get. It had only ever been about what she could give. And Liam had never known a love like that before. One night, everything changed. Liam had barely spoken all day. He had spent hours sitting by the window, lost in thoughts that darkened his soul. Sophia had watched him from a distance, her heart aching. Finally, she walked over and placed a cup of tea beside him. He didn't acknowledge her, but then she did something she had never done before. She reached out, hesitated for a second, and then placed her hand over his. Warm, software, steady. Liam flinched at the unexpected touch, his gaze snapping to her. Sophia didn't pull away. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with gentle strength. "You're not alone, Liam." His breath caught. Her words were simple, but they held the weight of 1,000 unspoken emotions. And for the first time, Liam didn't fight it. He didn't pull his hand away. He just let her hold him. Days passed, and slowly Liam began to change. Not in dramatic ways, but in small, subtle moments. Moments that Sophia noticed. He started eating without being forced. He started responding when she spoke. And then one evening, he did something she never expected. As she stood at the sink washing dishes, she felt a presence behind her. Liam. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Thank you." Sophia's hands froze in the water. She turned, stunned. In all the years she had worked for him, in all the time she had been by his side, he had never thanked her before. Her throat tightened. For what? His jaw clenched. For everything. Their eyes met, and for the first time she saw something new in his gaze. Something soft, vulnerable, real. Something that hadn't been there before. Liam had spent years overlooking Sophia. She had always been just the maid, a presence in his house but never in his mind. But now he saw her, not just as the woman who had stayed when everyone else left, not just as the person who had cared for him without expecting anything in return, but as a woman who was strong, a woman who was beautiful, a woman who had given him the one thing he had never known, unconditional love. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. One night, as Sophia placed a blanket over him while he slept on the couch, he caught her wrist. Her breath hitched. Slowly, he opened his eyes. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then in a hoarse whisper, he said something that made her heart stop. "You don't have to take care of me anymore." Her chest tightened. "I want to." A flicker of emotion passed through his eyes. "Why?" She smiled softly. "Because I love you." Liam sucked in a sharp breath. His grip on her wrist tightened ever so slightly. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Not in a painful way, but in a way that felt like freedom. Freedom from his past, freedom from the walls he had built around his heart. And as he stared at Sophia, at the woman who had healed him with nothing but love, he knew he had fallen for her too. Liam Carter had been many things in life, a businessman, a leader, a man of power, but never had he been a man in love. He had indulged in relationships before, meaningless affairs that never lasted beyond fleeting desires. Women had admired his wealth, his status, his charm, yet not a single one had stayed when the riches crumbled. All except one, Sophia Bennett. She had stayed when he had nothing to offer. She had cared when he had lost all reason to believe in kindness. She had loved him when he had nothing left but broken pride and an empty heart. And now he was beginning to feel something he had never felt before. The morning light streamed into the small apartment, casting a golden glow on the simple surroundings. It was a far cry from the mansion he once owned, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. Liam sat on the edge of his bed, his gaze drifting to the kitchen where Sophia moved gracefully, preparing breakfast. She hummed softly to herself, her brown skin glowing in the sunlight, her hands moving with gentle care as she placed a cup of coffee on the table. She had done this every morning since she returned to his life. At first he had resented it, his pride rejecting the idea of a woman taking care of him. But now he found himself waking up just to see her there, to hear her voice, to feel the warmth of her presence. Something inside him had shifted, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Sophia turned and caught him staring. She smiled, that soft, breathtaking smile that always made his chest tighten. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Liam cleared his throat, looking away. "Yeah, just thinking," she chuckled. "That's dangerous for you." He smirked, shaking his head. "Very funny." But beneath the teasing, there was something different in his gaze, something softer, something she had longed to see for years. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at her as just a maid. As days passed, Liam found himself watching her more, noticing things he had never taken the time to see before. The way she always placed his coffee exactly how he liked it, without needing to ask. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought. The way her laughter could fill even the emptiest of spaces. And the way his heart ached when she wasn't around. It was in these small, quiet moments that Liam realized the truth. He was falling in love, and it terrified him. Liam Carter was not a man who allowed himself to be vulnerable. He had built his life on control, on keeping emotions at a distance. But with Sophia, control didn't exist. She had already broken past his walls before he even knew she was doing it. And now he was left with a choice. Ignore his feelings, pretend they didn't exist, or take the risk of loving her back. It should have been an easy decision. But love had never been easy for him, especially not when he had spent years ignoring the very woman who had loved him all along. One evening, as they sat together on the small couch, Sophia noticed his distant expression. "Liam," she called softly. He turned to her, his blue eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Of course." He hesitated before speaking. "Why did you stay?" Her breath caught. For a moment she didn't know how to answer. Then with a gentle smile, she said the words she had carried in her heart for years. "Because I love you." Silence. His heart stopped. Her words were so simple, so effortless, as if they had always been there, waiting for him to hear them, waiting for him to believe them. And in that moment, everything changed. Liam had spent his life chasing wealth, power, and success. He had believed love was just another transaction, something bought with grand gestures and expensive gifts. But now, looking at Sophia, he realized he had been wrong all along, because love wasn't something to be earned. It was something given freely, something that had been in front of him this whole time, and now he couldn't run from it anymore. His hand moved before he could stop it, reaching out, his fingers brushing against hers. Sophia gasped at the sudden contact, her eyes widening in surprise. Liam held her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, But he couldn't say it. Not yet. because saying it meant accepting that he had wasted years ignoring the woman who had loved him most. Saying it meant admitting that he had finally fallen. But as he held her hand in his, he knew. There was no going back. He was already hers. He had always been. A man who believed in power, wealth, and control. Love had never been part of his world. It had always been a weakness, a distraction he had no time for. But now, as he sat beside Sophia in the dimly lit apartment, watching the soft glow of the candlelight reflect in her deep brown eyes, he felt his world shift. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Not of failure, not of losing money, but of losing her. The air between them was thick with something unspoken yet undeniable. Liam could feel the words pressing against his chest, suffocating him. He had never struggled to speak before. He had given million-dollar speeches, closed billion-dollar deals, commanded rooms filled with powerful people. But now, sitting in a quiet apartment with nothing left but her, he had never been more nervous in his life. His hands clenched into fists as he swallowed the lump in his throat. Finally, he turned to her. "Sophia," he whispered. She looked up, her expression gentle, patient, always patient. "Why did you stay?" The question escaped before he could stop it. He hadn't meant to ask, hadn't meant to sound so broken. But the words carried all his fears, all his regrets, all his disbelief that someone like her, pure, selfless, good, could love someone like him. Sophia's gaze didn't waver. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. Instead, a small, sad smile curved her lips. "Because love isn't about wealth or status, Liam." Her voice was soft, but each word hit him like a hammer. "I loved you even when you ignored me." Liam sucked in a sharp breath. "I loved you even when you didn't know my name." His heart clenched, tight, painful, raw. Liam had spent his whole life believing people only loved him for what he had, for his money, for his power, for his influence. But Sophia, she had loved him when he had nothing, when he was nothing, when the rest of the world had walked away without a second glance. And suddenly, he couldn't hold back anymore. Tears burned at the back of his eyes, his throat tightening with an emotion he couldn't control. He had never cried in front of anyone before. Not when he lost his company. Not when his so-called friends turned their backs on him. But now with Sophia, the woman who had loved him in silence. The woman who had waited for him even when he never deserved it. The dam inside him broke. Liam turned to face her fully, his jaw clenched, his body tense. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice hoarse, filled with 1,000 emotions. Her eyes searched his, as if waiting for something, as if hoping, praying. His fingers trembled as he reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm, soft beneath his fingertips. And then, "I love you." The words fell from his lips before he could stop them, before he could second-guess himself, before he could let his fear take over. Sophia's breath hitched. Her lips parted in surprise, her hands shaking in her lap. For a moment there was silence, a thick, deafening silence. Then, "Say it again," she whispered. Liam's chest tightened. He cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "I love you, Sophia." A single tear slid down her cheek. Not of sadness, but of something deeper, something she had waited years to hear. Her hands covered his, holding him close, as if she was afraid this was just a dream, as if she was afraid he might take it back. But he wouldn't. He never would. Sophia's lips trembled as she whispered, "I've loved you for so long, Liam." His heart clenched. "I know. I waited for you, even when you never saw me." He swallowed hard. "I see you now, Sophia." His fingers tightened around hers as if anchoring himself to this moment. "And I swear, I will never stop seeing you." She let out a shaky breath, her smile breaking through the tears. And in that moment, Liam Carter, the arrogant businessman, the man who once believed love was just a lie, the man who once thought he needed nothing but wealth, finally understood. He had been rich once, but he had never been truly wealthy. Because Sophia, her love, her loyalty, her heart, that was the greatest fortune of all. Liam's gaze dropped to her lips. He had never craved something more. Not money, not power, not status, just her. Slowly he leaned in, a silent question in his eyes, a silent answer in hers. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a new beginning, a love that had always been there, waiting to be found, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be forever. Liam's lips lingered against Sophia's, his heart pounding with an intensity he had never felt before. It wasn't just a kiss, it was everything. It was the realization of love long ignored, of devotion long taken for granted. His hands trembled as they cradled her face, his thumbs wiping away the silent tears that had escaped her eyes. "You're crying," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Sophia let out a soft, shaky laugh. "I've dreamed of this moment for so long. I never thought it would come true." Liam's heart twisted painfully. She had loved him in silence for years, and he, blind, arrogant, and too consumed by his own world, had ignored her. How could he have been so foolish? He exhaled deeply, pressing his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you, Sophia," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't say that," she whispered back, her fingers tightening around his. "Love isn't about who deserves who. It's about who chooses to stay when the rest of the world walks away." Liam closed his eyes, absorbing her words like a balm to his wounded soul. She had stayed. When the world turned its back on him, when he had nothing to offer, when he had been at his lowest, she had stayed, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew just how much that meant to him. Liam pulled away slightly, his gaze searching hers. "Sophia, I need you to know something." She tilted her head, her brown eyes filled with curiosity. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not the same man I was before. I don't have my wealth, my business, my influence. I don't even know what my future looks like. All I have is you." Sophia smiled, her fingers tracing the side of his face gently. "Then you have everything you need." His chest tightened. She meant it. She truly didn't care about the things that had once defined his entire existence. For the first time in his life, Liam Carter understood what real love was. It wasn't expensive gifts or grand gestures. It was this: two people holding on to each other when everything else was falling apart. But even as warmth spread through him, a fear crept in. What if he lost her? What if life took her away? What if one day she woke up and realized she deserved someone better? Someone who had always known her worth? "I don't want to lose you," he confessed, his grip on her hand tightening. "I can't." Sophia smiled softly, placing her hand over his heart. "Then don't. Stay with me." Her words were simple, but they shook him to his core, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one asking someone to leave. He was the one begging someone to stay. Liam held Sophia close that night, afraid that if he let go, she might disappear. They sat in the dim glow of the small apartment, their fingers entwined, their hearts beating in sync. For hours they talked, about the past, about their pain, about the dreams they had never dared to speak aloud. Liam learned things about Sophia that he had never taken the time to notice before. Her favorite flower was a white lily. She loved the sound of rain against the window. She had once dreamed of becoming a writer, but had sacrificed her dreams to help her younger siblings after their parents passed away. She had given up so much for others, and yet she had never once complained. Liam tightened his hold on her, vowing to himself that she would never have to sacrifice her happiness again. Not if he had anything to do with it. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to be a better man for you." She smiled, her fingers threading through his hair. "You already are." The next morning, Liam woke up before Sophia. For a long moment, he simply watched her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful, curled up beside him. A warmth spread through his chest. This was home. Not the mansions, not the luxury. Her. His future wasn't uncertain anymore, because as long as he had Sophia, he knew exactly where he belonged. Carefully, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Good morning," she whispered sleepily. Liam smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good morning, my love." She blushed, her cheeks warming beneath his touch. "You called me my love," she murmured. His smile deepened. "Because that's what you are." Sophia let out a soft laugh, burying her face against his chest. "I like how that sounds." Liam tightened his arms around her. "Get used to it, because I plan on calling you that for the rest of my life." And for the first time in years, Liam Carter felt truly, completely happy. Liam Carter was no longer the man he used to be. Gone was the arrogant businessman who once believed that money defined his worth. Gone was the man who looked down on those who had less. He had lost everything only to find the one thing that mattered most: love, and he would never take it for granted again. Sophia had been his anchor through the storm, the light that had guided him when he was lost in darkness. He owed her more than just gratitude. He owed her a future, a life filled with the happiness she deserved. And that was exactly what he planned to give her. Liam wasn't the kind of man to sit back and accept defeat. His pride had been shattered when he lost his business. But now, with Sophia by his side, he saw the world differently. He no longer craved wealth for the sake of power or status. Now he wanted success for them, for their future, for the life they could build together. Sophia saw the fire reignite in his eyes, the same passion that had once made him a feared businessman. But this time, it wasn't driven by greed or arrogance. It was driven by love. Liam started small. With the little savings he had left, he invested wisely, carefully choosing his steps. He no longer made rash decisions based on ego. This time, he sought advice, weighed his options, and moved forward with caution. And through it all, Sophia was right there beside him. She was his greatest motivation, his biggest supporter. She worked late nights with him, helped him draft plans, and encouraged him when doubt crept in. Liam had been a man who once dismissed her as nothing more than a maid. Now he couldn't imagine his life without her. Months passed, and slowly, his efforts bore fruit. A small startup, then a profitable investment. Step by step, Liam regained his footing in the business world. But this time, he did things differently. He treated his employees with respect. He listened. He cared. And because of that, his new company thrived. But no success compared to the joy he felt coming home every night to Sophia. No amount of money in the world could replace the warmth of her smile when he walked through the door. He had everything he needed. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their modest apartment, Liam held Sophia's hand in his, staring out at the city skyline. "You were right," he murmured. She turned to him, her eyes curious. "About what?" He looked at her, his gaze filled with nothing but love. "Happiness isn't in wealth. It's in moments like these." Sophia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad you see that now." Liam exhaled, his grip on her hand tightening. "I love you, Sophia. Not because you stayed when no one else did, but because you've shown me the kind of man I want to be. A man worthy of you." Sophia's breath hitched, her eyes glistening with emotion. She had loved Liam for so long, through his worst and now his best. And now he loved her just as fiercely in return. She cupped his face, her voice barely a whisper. "You already are." And as their lips met under the night sky, Liam knew. This was the beginning of something far greater than any empire he had ever built. This was forever. Liam Carter had never been the type of man who believed in love. For most of his life, love had seemed like a transaction, something people used to gain power, wealth, or status. He had seen countless women throw themselves at him, not for who he was, but for what he had. But Sophia changed everything. She had loved him before he lost his fortune. She had loved him after he had nothing left. And now, as he stood before her, he knew. He would spend the rest of his life proving that he deserved her. Liam had spent weeks planning the perfect moment. Sophia had given him her heart, her loyalty, and her soul. Now it was his turn to give her the world. On a quiet evening, he took her to the small rooftop garden of their apartment. The city lights twinkled in the background, but Liam only saw her. his beautiful, strong, brown-skinned woman, the woman who had stayed when everyone else had left. As Sophia turned to him with a soft smile, Liam's heart pounded in his chest. With a deep breath, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened. "Liam!" He dropped to one knee, his voice shaking with emotion. "Sophia, I've spent my whole life chasing the wrong things, but losing everything made me realize I only ever needed one thing, and that's you." Tears filled her eyes as she pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "I love you, Sophia. I love you more than anything in this world. And I promise, if you say yes, I will spend every single day making you the happiest woman alive." Sophia's breath hitched, her vision blurred with tears. And then, with a choked laugh, she whispered, "Yes." The moment the word left her lips, Liam slipped the ring onto her finger, pulling her into his arms. The rooftop was silent except for the sound of their laughter, their kisses, and the beating of two hearts finally becoming one. Liam had once imagined his wedding would be a grand, extravagant event, a show of wealth and power. But standing in a beautifully decorated small chapel, surrounded by only their closest friends, he realized this was the only kind of wedding that ever truly mattered. Sophia walked down the aisle, her beauty stealing his breath away. She wore a simple white gown, yet she was the most stunning woman he had ever seen. Her brown skin glowed under the soft sunlight, her dark curls cascading down her back. Her eyes, God, those eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at him with unspoken love when he was too blind to see it. Now they gazed at him with forever. As she reached him, Liam took her hands in his grip firm, as if he would never let go. The priest spoke, but Liam barely heard the words. All he could see was Sophia. All he could feel was love. And then it was time for his vows. He took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. "Sophia, I never thought I deserved love, but you taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about staying when times are hard. It's about choosing each other every single day." His hands trembled as he continued. "You are my home, my heart, my everything. And today I vow to love you, cherish you, and stand by you for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down Sophia's cheeks as she whispered, "I love you, Liam." And as the priest declared them husband and wife, Liam captured her lips in a kiss, one filled with every emotion he had never known how to express before. The guests cheered, but for Liam, the world had faded away. There was only her, his wife, his love, his forever. That night, as they stood in their small but cozy home, Liam pulled Sophia into his arms, his lips grazing her forehead. "You made me believe in love, Sophia." She smiled up at him, her fingers tracing his jaw. "And you made me believe in miracles." Liam leaned down, brushing his lips against hers. "Then let's spend forever making more." And as they held each other close, hearts entwined, Liam knew he had finally found his greatest treasure, and this time he would never let it go. Marriage had changed Liam in ways he never thought possible. A year ago, he had been a man who measured success in wealth, luxury, and power. Now he measured it in laughter, quiet mornings with Sophia, and the way her love filled every corner of his life. Liam woke up to the scent of fresh coffee and the warmth of sunlight streaming through their bedroom window. But more than anything, he woke up to her. Sophia lay beside him, her soft brown skin glowing in the morning light, her breath steady, peaceful. Her long curls were slightly messy from sleep, and yet she looked like the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He smiled, brushing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave him that drowsy, half-asleep smile that always made his heart race. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. Liam chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." He still couldn't believe that she was his, that after years of chasing the wrong things, he had finally found the one thing that truly mattered. Sophia stretched, playfully nudging him. "Are you going to stare at me all day, or are you getting up?" Liam grinned. "I could do both." She laughed, and he swore it was the sweetest sound in the world. Their days were no longer filled with extravagant parties or business meetings in high-rise offices. Instead, they spent their time building something real. Liam had started his business again, this time with careful decisions and ethical investments. But unlike before, work no longer controlled his life. He made time for home-cooked meals, for long walks with Sophia, for simply enjoying the life they had created together. Sophia had also pursued her dreams. She had always loved baking, and with Liam's encouragement, she had opened her own small bakery. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was hers. The first time she made a sale, Liam had picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a kid. "You did it, sweetheart," he had whispered against her lips, and she had smiled, knowing that with him by her side, she could do anything. Every day their love only grew stronger. They danced in their living room, even when there was no music. They left little notes for each other, on mirrors, on coffee cups, on pillows. Sophia would write things like, "You are my forever." Liam would respond with, "And you are my always." They laughed more, dreamed bigger. Liam, who had once cared only for wealth, now cared only for her. Sophia, who had once thought love was only a distant dream, now woke up to it every morning. One evening, as they sat on their small balcony, sipping tea, Sophia seemed quieter than usual. Liam noticed instantly. He always noticed. He set down his cup, reaching for her hand. "Sophia, what is it?" She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. And then, with a trembling smile, she whispered, "Liam, I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world stopped. Liam stared at her, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. "Say that again," he breathed. Sophia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "We're going to have a baby." Liam had never cried in his life. Not when he lost his wealth. Not when he was abandoned by everyone he trusted. But tonight, as he pulled Sophia into his arms, his chest shook with emotion. He buried his face in her hair, his voice raw with love. "You have given me everything, Sophia. And now, you're giving me a family." She held him just as tightly, knowing that this love, their love, was the most precious thing in the world. Liam had once believed that power and wealth defined a man, that success was measured in assets, luxury, and the number of people who admired him. But tonight, as he stood in the quiet hospital room, cradling two tiny newborns in his arms, he knew he had been so wrong. This moment, this love, this family, was true wealth. Sophia had gone into labor in the early hours of the morning. Liam had never been more terrified in his life. He had built empires, closed multi-million-dollar deals, and stood against ruthless businessmen. But nothing compared to the fear of seeing the love of his life in pain. Sophia had gripped his hand so tightly during labor that he thought his bones would break. Yet he never let go. "Breathe, sweetheart," he had whispered, stroking her damp hair, kissing her trembling forehead. "I'm right here. I won't leave you." Her screams had shaken him to his core. Her pain had shattered him. But when the cries of their babies finally filled the room, Liam felt like he had been reborn. The doctor smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. You have twins, a healthy boy and girl." Liam had never cried before, but the moment he saw his children, his flesh and blood, tears spilled down his face. Now, standing by Sophia's hospital bed, Liam held his newborns for the first time. A boy with a strong grip, just like his mother. A girl with delicate fingers, just like his father had once dreamed. His heart swelled as he looked down at them, his tears dripping onto their tiny blankets. Sophia, exhausted but smiling, reached out for him. Liam leaned down and pressed the softest kiss to her forehead. "You gave me love when I had nothing, and now you've given me everything." Sophia's eyes shimmered with emotion. "They're our miracle, Liam." He knelt beside her, carefully placing one baby in her arms while keeping the other close to his chest. "No," he whispered, "you're my miracle." Liam had been a man who once had everything and lost it all, but Sophia had stayed. She had picked him up when he had nothing, had loved him when no one else did. Now he was holding their children, the proof of their love, their journey, their second chance. "I will protect them with my life," Liam vowed, pressing a kiss to his daughter's tiny fingers. "I will love them the way you loved me, Sophia. Unconditionally. Sophia's tired smile deepened. I know you will. Their son yawned, and Liam chuckled. Look at him, already tired of his dad's dramatic speeches. Sophia laughed softly, and Liam swore it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Days later, they returned home, greeted by a house filled with warmth, love, and the scent of freshly baked cookies, Sophia's favorite. Liam carried Sophia into their home, their baby sleeping in their arms. Their once empty house was now full of laughter, of love, of a future they built together. Liam stood in the nursery, watching his twins sleep. A tear slipped down his cheek. Not out of sadness, but because his heart was too full. He turned to Sophia, pulling her into his arms. Thank you for never giving up on me. She cupped his face, her eyes shining. Love isn't about giving up, Liam. It's about holding on, even when it's hard. And so he held her, tighter than ever before. Years ago, Liam had believed he was rich. But riches fade. Wealth disappears. What mattered was the love that stayed. And as he stood in the home he built with Sophia, watching their children grow, he realized he was the wealthiest man alive.